I want to shift even more specific into the interview stuff really quick, because there is one question, and it's not even a question, but it's one phrase that every single person who's feeling imposter syndrome gets asked and gets completely overwhelmed by, and I'm sure you know what it is already, but the "tell me about yourself" phrase question, right?
Sure.
Um, every coach has kind of their own style on how they coach people on this, but I'm just so curious, like with everything we've talked about up to this point, um, before we even get into how to answer that question, I want to focus in on the interviewer, the person asking it, because I find that so interesting how, like, I always ask people, what do you think they're asking you? What do you think they want to hear? And the answers I get are all over the map. But you mentioned that the interviewer is likely not trained in how to interview, right? So why are they even asking this question? Where did they get this question? What is this? So I'm curious, on the hiring side, what is going through the interviewer's head? Or what should we be sort of priming ourselves to think about when we get asked that question? What are we trying
Sure.
to fulfill for them?
Sure. To be honest, um, when it comes to if I'm interviewing somebody and if I were to ask that question, maybe I did decades ago. Uh, I have literally no idea why we asked that question. Well, one, we were probably told forever ago we need to ask that question, right? And why ask a question when we're not going to get the answer that we want out of the client, right? So I'm serious, right?
Yeah.
So I say keep that answer brief because listen, it is better to keep things brief than it is to ramble. I personally think. Why? Because if they need to know more, they'll ask. I know I will. You know, if I was interviewing somebody and they gave me just a little bit, I would maybe ask them to expand on this or expand on that a little bit more. Uh, I tell my clients if you get that question, and not necessarily all the time when you get that question, uh, tell them why you enjoy doing what you do. Now, if you're a project manager, I don't want you to get into the exact things of what you do. What brought you to that role? What brought you to that place that you're passionate about doing what you're doing? And leave it there. They don't want to know about your dogs. They don't
Mm-mm.
want to know about your hobbies or anything like that unless they ask or it just comes up in just doing some chit chatting. But briefly tell them why you love doing what you're doing and maybe even why you're here today. Just
Mm-hmm.
just ever so briefly. And don't try to do too much because if you do, you will ramble because you'll try to read their body language. You'll try to, oh, I got to come up with some other things. But why we ask that, I have no idea. It serves me no purpose. Give them a direction. So when you started, you know, uh, this journey as being a project manager, what inspired you to be a project manager? What do you like about the job, or what are some things maybe you don't care to do in your role? Right? Ask them questions like that. You're gonna get maybe some substance. Why we ask some things that we ask, I think it's because it's on a piece of paper or somebody in HR told us to.
I think that's 100% right, because they're not
It
trained
is.
on interviewing, and they just download the same list that we all have access to on Google of top interview questions, and that's always the first one on every list. So it's just like this perpetuating machine of people asking that question. And I always say to folks, I'm like, the person who's interviewing you is just as like uncomfortable as you are, maybe not just as, but definitely uncomfortable. And I've always like to reframe that question as, I don't know where to start. Can you kick things off? Like, that's what they're saying. I don't know where to start. Can you kick things off? And then the question becomes, how do you want to kick off this interview? What tone do you want to set? And I want to bring back that tone piece. Like, what tone should someone be trying to set when they answer that question?
Sure. Well, when they answer it, what do I want that person to get? That's easy. Why I do what I do, why I enjoy doing it, and maybe even a little bit of why I'm here. I
Hmm.
keep it, keep it to that, right? Because then if they ask that in the beginning, that person's going to know, that person that's interviewing, why you're here, what you're passionate about. Maybe it even leads to some additional questions based on what you say. I know when I interviewed people, I would have basic questions, but to be honest, I listened to what they were saying. I took notes as the person that was doing the interview, and I might automatically jot down, okay, I got to learn more about that. Or how does he or she implement this, right? So, you know, I'm more listening to what they bring and gearing my questions. Look, I never had to provide HR or my boss with how they answered questions. So to be honest, after I learned that a lot of basic interview questions are terrible, I really crafted my own or just let the conversation. So that was perfect. You know what you had just said. Yes, setting the tone. So if they ask that initial question right in the beginning, then hopefully you can expand on a few of those things, or they take again some of the wording that you say or some of the answers and lead you down a different path, one that you're comfortable with based on what you said in the beginning.
Yeah, you're going exactly where I was hoping you would go. And so this brings me back to what you had said earlier, which is, companies don't train their people to do interviews, right? And there's this really interesting dynamic that comes up when I'm coaching people where they they have one of two experiences. One, they put the company on a pedestal that is way higher than the company deserves, right? They're like, if I don't get that job at Google, my life is over. And then the next call I get on is someone who works at Google saying, I need to get the hell out of here, right? And that's always a fun dynamic as a coach to see. But individuals, like when we have imposter syndrome, we put ourselves down and we put companies up. We put them way too high up. And we put interviewers up too. We're like, oh my gosh, this person is like some godlike creature that I have to impress or something like that. When in reality, that same person you're interviewing with is about to get on a call with you or I and talk about how much they hate their job, right?